Right. 25th of March, 2026, I've encountered the somewhat unenviable task of trying to convey what I feel is relevant and important about Mircea Eliade and his first chapter in The Forge and the Crucible, which is entitled Meteorites and Metallurgy. So I'm about to keep focused on the text. Do I want to give any introduction? I'm not sure that anyone will actually be able to hear what I consider to be relevant about the works of Eliade, or however you pronounce his ridiculous name. Lovely Romanian name, but no, just to say that this expression is a way of coping with a bunch of emotions, and let's see if I can focus that in a way that actually does express the meaning that is embedded in the text and that is present here. So, Mircea Eliade, meteorites and metallurgy. And what I'm going to be doing is, yeah, I'm going to be reading and I'm going to be commenting. I'm asking for a lot of rope. In fact, very few people are going to be able to have the care, frankly, to actually follow me into this morass. But there is a way through. It's just tricky to navigate because it requires, in this chapter, some judgment about what in fact is relevant, which means that people watching it have to trust me that some of it is as an investment of their time and energy. But frankly, I'm not. This isn't for the sake of others. It's for the sake of what I'm able to find just with me, actually. Starting from page 19, meteorites and metallurgy. Eliade states, it was inevitable that meteorites should inspire awe. They came from some remote region high up in the heavens and possessed a sacred quality enjoyed only by things celestial. So immediately here we're talking about the mythology of the sky. And so the primordial emotions that we feel when we look up towards the sky are then associated with meteorites, which come from that place. He continues, in certain cultures, there was a time when men thought the sky was made of stone. And even today, the Australian, again, this is published in 1967, originally, sorry, 1956, and then translated in 1962. As he was saying, even today, the Australian Aborigines believe the vault of heaven to be made of rock crystal and the throne of the heavenly deity of quartz. Rock crystals, supposedly broken away from the heavenly throne, do in fact play a special role in the shamanic initiation ceremonies of the Australian Aborigines, among the Negritos of Malacca in North America and elsewhere. Okay, so already that's quite a lot of information that we've just encountered. Again, in the topic of like, hey, what did we forget about shamanism that is like relevant that we could pay more attention to? Part of the answer is the involvement of particularly quartz crystal in shamanic initiation ceremonies and the mythological properties associated with meteorites, things that literally fall from the sky, quartz crystal among them, are those qualities that we feel are taken up into what we associate. And it's not just a matter of association, it's also the finding, it's a shamanic finding, is that certain objects, namely rocks that have literally fallen from the sky, possess certain properties that actually make them relevant within the context of a shamanic initiation ceremony, for example. That's what Eliade is pointing to. Quote, and again, this is like cross-culturally, like around the world, as he's saying in Malacca, in Australia, in North America, and elsewhere. Quote, these stones of light, as they are called by the maritime Dayaks of Sarawak, who are a people, reflect everything that happens on Earth. They reflect everything that happens on Earth. They disclose to the shaman what has taken place in the sick man's soul and the destination to which his soul takes flight. Okay, so basically, these rock crystals, in the context of a shamanic, in fact, healing, you know, part of what shamans do is to heal, right? Well, like, how do they do that? Well, in this context, what's being discovered actually is that quartz crystal can give them relevant information about the health of the sick person's soul. Quote, there's no need to remind the reader that the shaman is he who sees, because he is endowed with a supernatural vision. He sees just as far into space as into time. Likewise, he can perceive what is invisible to the layman, spirits, gods, the soul. Okay, so basically what's being talked about here is that is shamanic capacity. And there's a connection, as in one relevant question is, how does the shaman do the things that shamans can do? How do they see in the way that they do? And one answer is that they that they literally like receive information from a quartz crystal that tells them like that particular object in the context of, I'm going to say in the context of psychedelics, and there's a clear link between psychedelics and shamanism here, is giving them information, allowing them to see. So it's a certain combination, a certain person, certain objects, and certain, let's say, shamanic practices create this combination that involves deep knowledge, deep insight into someone's healing process. Again, quote unquote, he can perceive what is invisible to the layman, spirits, gods, and the soul. Quote, when he's being initiated, the future shaman is fed with crystals of quartz. So this is deeper. This is about there's in fact, quite a deep connection, it seems, between the role or the skill of the shaman and quartz crystals. Quote, in other words, his capacity as a visionary, as well as his science, comes to him, at least in part, from a mystic solidarity with heaven. Okay, so this expands it a little bit more. This is implying, I would say, that it's not just talking about like literally information that can come from a rock. It's saying that there's a certain kind of relationship with that which the meteorite represents, the celestial, the heavenly, that a shaman has. And that the presence of the object, like the object in a way symbolizes, meaning gathers together that mythological quality. So there's a way that the presence of that object, literally in the context of shamanism, makes present that relationship, such that the shamanic capacity, literally derives from, in large part, that quote mystic solidarity with heaven. Let's continue. Quote, we shall do well to bear in mind the early religious significance attached to aeroliths, which is essentially a synonym for meteorite, if I understand it right. So it's going into this connection more. It's like we were just talking about how particular objects represent this sacred celestial quality in the context of shamanic initiation, but now he's going into the broader religious significance of, let's say, meteorites. Quote, they fall to earth charged with celestial sanctity. In a way, they represent heaven. This would suggest why so many meteorites were worshipped or identified with a deity. The faithful saw in them the first form, the immediate manifestation of the Godhead. So the sacred significance of meteorites has to do with the fact that they are a symbol. People see in them, again, quote, the immediate manifestation of the Godhead, the first form. He then gives several examples, which I have elected not to lay out here, of, examples from Egypt, from Greece. He gives the example of the Kaaba in Mecca, of like worship of meteorites as religious symbols, essentially. Quote, it's noteworthy that a certain number of meteorites are associated with goddesses, especially fertility goddesses. And here we come up against a transference of sanctity. The celestial origin is forgotten to the advantage of the religious notion of the Petra Genetrix. Genetrix is Latin for literally like generative rock. The point he's making is that we were just talking about the original sort of mythological significance attached to meteorites which fell from heaven, namely the connection with the heavenly or the celestial. But that significance, like there's a from the human, is like, hey, that thing has meaning or importance in a religious or, yeah, sanctified way. And the tone of that relationship then changed. And it changed in a particular way such that these stones later become associated with the mother, namely with fertility in particular. And so the stones come to represent the fertility of the earth or the generative quality of the earth. There's the obvious question of why would that transition have been made, but it seems to have been, according to Eliade. Let's continue. Quote, but the heavenly and hence masculine essence of the meteorites is nonetheless beyond dispute. For certain, quote, silex and Neolithic tools were subsequently given names like thunderstones, thunderbolt teeth, or God's axes. The sites where they were found were thought to have been struck by a thunderbolt, which is the weapon of the god of heaven. When this god was ousted by the god of storms, the thunderbolt became the sign of the sacred union between the god of the hurricane and the goddess Earth. This may account for the large number of double axes discovered in this period in the clefts and caves of Crete, or Crete. Yeah, so he's just like giving more, I don't know, more of a foundation to this original association that he made between the meteorites and that which is celestial or heavenly. In terms of, for example, the hammer of Thor, or Thor's hammer, as it's colloquially known. Because this association is like what comes from heaven, literally like thunder and lightning and rain. Well, those qualities was like Zeus had a lightning bolt, right? And Thor has like a rock, right, which endows him with the power of striking things with lightning. Well, it's like, why is that the case? Well, this that collection of stuff was symbolized in that meteorite that was regarded as having a celestial, sacred, heavenly, and powerful quality, such that it was worshipped. But again, he's saying that this was then transferred, such that the thunderbolt became a sign of sacred union between the god of the hurricane and the goddess Earth. He just gives one example after this point, which is that he was talking about double-bladed axes in this context, that they in some ways symbolize the union between heaven and earth. And he gives the example of Delphi, which is, the Oracle of Delphi, as in all the Greeks were taking psychedelics. Where did they do that? The Oracle of Delphi. And it's Delphi literally, in fact, signifies the female generative organ as it's described here. And Why is that relevant? Is the question. Yeah, the relevance is that the place of Delphi itself symbolizes, or in fact signifies, the union of heaven and earth. And so it was the relevance of psychedelics, again, is that shamanic practice is associated with the Oracle of Delphi, as in people would go to Delphi and they would experience shamanically, let's say, the union of heaven and earth, which is why it was a place that became associated with that, obviously. Sorry. Now let's continue. He said, primitive peoples worked with meteoric iron for a long time before learning how to use ferrous ores. Okay, so what he's saying is that again, this is in the context of like, hey, what's going wrong with the metacrisis? Well, like maybe it has to do with our relationship with technology. Well, it's like, when did we start using metal? Maybe that's the source of the problem. It's like he's saying, hey, well, we've worked out how to work metal with meteorites that fell from heaven long before we learned how to work metal that came from ores in the ground. And that could be relevant if, for example, we made some kind of mistake, spiritually speaking, back at the origins of metallurgy, which is why it could be relevant. Let's continue. Again, he said, I'm not going to repeat that. He then goes, it's known, moreover, that prehistoric peoples, before the discovery of smelting, treated certain ores as though they were stones. That is, they looked upon them as raw materials for the making of stone tools. Ah, okay. I think I worked out the answer, which is that, hey, we were making stone tools for literally like 3.4 million years is the oldest evidence of stone tools that we have, and like around the time of Homo habilis started to use stone tools. I'm saying that we then transferred that to metals, assuming that that would just be fine. It's like, hey, we can make metal tools the same way that we've been making stone tools, because again, we looked upon ores as raw materials for the making of stone tools. And they weren't, as in that was a mistake, as in there are certain spiritual properties associated with different metals which we did not appropriately acknowledge or consider when we were making those tools. Quote, I know, like, a similar technique was applied until recently by certain peoples having no knowledge of metallurgy. They worked the meteorite with silex hammers and fashioned objects whose shape resembled in all respects their stone models. No, he's simply making the same point. Yeah, they sort of like what he's saying is that if these people don't have any knowledge of metallurgy, that like when we first discover the meteorite or whatever, we just make the tool of the meteorites, as in we make tools out of meteorites in the same way, right? That we had been making stone tools, because that's what people do. It's like, well, why would you do it any differently? We know how to make tools out of stone. We'll just make the tools out of metal now. And the point is that that was a big mistake. Yeah, and so he gives the example of Cortez, who's maybe not so politically palatable at the moment. But anyway, Eliade gave the example of Cortez and said, when Cortez inquired of the Aztec chiefs whence they obtained their knives, they simply pointed to the sky, as in their knives were made out of meteoric iron. Quote, like the Mayas of Yucatan and the Incas of Peru, the Aztecs used only meteoric iron, which they rated higher than gold. Again, it's rated higher than gold because it has this sacred or celestial property, and it's endowed or imbued with that sacredness, making it higher than gold. So what I've decided to do here, like Eliade then goes into detail about what the origins of metallurgy are, but we were just talking about again the period before metallurgy. Before metallurgy, people started to make tools out of metal that fell from the sky in the same way that they used to make stone tools. And I'm saying, as per, by the way, Tyson Yungkaporta, that that was a mistake. And what I'm going to try and do now is like reinforce why that was a mistake or make stronger the point that I already made. And then I'm probably going to stop already. Let's see. Yeah, the point is that the claim, there's a specific claim which has been made, which is that this transition from tools that are made of stone to tools that are made of metal has serious and unforeseen consequences. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm saying that I would say that this is as per Daniel Schmachtenberger's technology is not values neutral kind of essay, which could be easily Googled. Technology is not values neutral. The point is that when we adopt certain technologies, there are serious consequences and ramifications that go along with that adoption that are, in a way, they're embedded in that technology itself. So what I'm saying, for example, if I give a quick example of that, is like, hey, if there's a gun there, people would say, oh no, it's about how you use the gun. It's like what I'm saying is no, that's actually wrong. It is in fact in the gun that people are more likely to be shot, for example. The- in the context of another war having just broken out, the very obvious point is that that's a bad thing, right? And we don't want that to be happening anymore. So how could we go to the depths of our relationship with technology to work out how to stop killing each other? That would seem to be a good idea. So then the claim would be something like, yeah, there's a particular connection here between the archetype of war, unresolved human shadow, and particular and specific spiritual qualities associated with particular metals that go together in such a way to create Moloch, to create the engines of destruction that are rolling towards us. Now I have to try and unpack that a little bit more. I'm going to sort of leave aside the obvious argument that, well, hey, we've been warring for a long time. I don't think that's a newly human thing if we look at chimps. And I think we can sort of see that human culture is sort of designed to stop us from doing that a bit, although it may not have. We may have just done it more. So war may be inevitable. I'm going to leave aside the argument about whether war is inevitable or not. We could sort of regulate that with a protocol for bounded and constrained intertribal warfare, for example, or put it into digital space or something like that. It's not so much that, it's the technology. It's because when conflict can be bounded and constrained, then it's less catastrophic. But when it can literally like destroy everything, then it's not so good, right? Yeah, and so then there's an obvious connection between the archetype of war and the unresolved human shadow. Yes, yes, yes. I'll go into in other places, perhaps, the connection between human culture and shamanic practice and the ego and unresolved shadow dynamics, as in when we don't have enough mystical experience and when we're not connected and loving each other and dancing and singing, then we go to war, which isn't so good. So maybe if we did it more of the human thing, then we wouldn't need to in the first place. But the point here is about particular, literally like particular metals. So I guess I'm making a, it's not exactly, it can't exactly be a scientific claim, can it? It's more like a shamanic claim, which is that hey, we just sort of assumed that we could use all of these tools as in fact tools. Because the point is, yes, that the left hemisphere is like manipulating and what am I saying? I'm saying that there's a left hemispheric mode of attention which is sort of uh, usurps the place of the right hemisphere in the context of tool making and tool use, which is causing the left hemisphere to overlook certain properties that are associated with particular metals. And I'm also saying that the Indigenous Australians were onto this and they know all about it. And if we listened to them, they would tell us. But we haven't been. Yep. There are particular consequences, particular effects, particular ramifications, spiritual and otherwise, that are embedded in and attached to and associated with particular metals, such that I don't know how to put that exactly. What I'm saying, I think I'm saying that when we started to use metal tools, tools that were made of metal, that became a sphere of expression for demonic energy. But that's just like another phrase, and like anyone who's vaguely scientifically trained is now like, what? But yeah, that is in fact the case. As in, there is a nefarious uh collusion between aspects of the unconscious human shadow, personal shadow, and collective shadow. And again, spiritual properties, or you could say demonic forces, but let's keep it PG with spiritual properties associated with particular metals that lead to the metacrisis. Okay, well, then the obvious point from there, like I could just stop that there. It's like, great job, Sam. What do we do? And I have to think about it for a minute. Okay, I worked out a couple of small things. It's kind of more like a general direction. I'm not here to provide a white paper, it's not like, oh, here's what to do. It's not quite like that. But obviously, the obvious point would be that what I'm saying is that metals are messing with us, and they are. So, like broadly speaking, what I'm saying is that when we sort of took all this, when we started to take metal out of the ground, I'm not sure actually. It's an excellent question as to like whether these problems began with like when we started to use meteorites as metal tools, or when we started to use ores, as in rock, as in, sorry, metal from the ground. At the moment, I'm inclined to say both, but I'm going to investigate further. The point is, when we started to use metals in that way, there were very powerful spiritual forces that came into play in the human sphere that we were unprepared to deal with. And those forces essentially had the effect, in fact, they had the effect of the double-bladed axe, which is that like those tools that are made of metal are sharp on both sides. And just because you make a handle at one end and the other end is a blade, doesn't mean you're not being cut, because that is in fact exactly what happened, which is to say that those metal tools tore the sphere of human culture into ribbons. So they had an effect on human culture itself, which was diabolical, meaning intending to disintegrate or take apart or corrupt. So the obvious point would then be, how can we put human culture back together? Because if we can put human culture back together, basically the more human culture we have, the more we can, let's assume, safely integrate powerful technologies. That seems a rather obvious point to make. The more conservative response would be the Luddite response, which is by no means not called for. It's sort of like take the metal and put it in the ground, and like not in the middle of all the people, as in, look at all this metal that's like around here, the computer that I'm literally talking to at the moment. Which is like it. My point is, it sounds suspiciously like 5G networks, although that's not exactly what I meant. It's more like it's kind of deeper than that. Yeah. So what I'm the direction of a solution is toward Yeah, a cultural response. So particular cultural tools, shamanic tools, and yeah, it's I'm talking about particular spiritual capacities, I think. Although I would have to be more specific about exactly like what I'm talking about is like how can those demonic energies be bound and constrained? Like what is the proper place for metals and our relationship with them? It's that kind of a question. It's like where should we put those qualities, those relationships? I think if we can answer that question, like certainly the answer is not to use them as engines of war, but it's we can't just sort of say that because it's like a rationalistic answer. It's like, oh, we shouldn't be using them to make war. It's like, well, it's easy to say that, but people are. Yeah, so it would then have to be what if it was manifestly obvious? What if it became manifestly obvious that whenever we use metals as tools, we drop out of connection. We move further away from God, essentially. Just struck by yeah, the irony of our this situation because it's literally mediating the communication. But I mean, it does seem to be that like literally like the technology is building the body of the Antichrist or Moloch. I mean, pick your name, but it doesn't seem so friendly, the influence of technology. And I think I'm gonna end that there. I would say I've published in the psychological type series on the qualities associated with stone tool use and how they can be sort of counteracted with something a little bit more right hemispheric as a broad cultural orientation. But that's going to have to now be amended in light of, yeah, it might not be so consequential to make stone tools. It might be a lot more consequential to make tools that are made of metal. As in, when the, let's say, spiritual properties of those metals become unconstrained, then they essentially tear apart human culture. So we need to make human culture stronger so that they can handle that if we want to use the technology. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to, as in, this is Einstein's quote, like, hey, I don't know what the Third World War is going to be fought with, but the Fourth World War is going to be fought with sticks and stones. And that seems about right. I think Einstein is a good a place as any to leave it. So enough insight for today. Thank you for following me through this if you managed to do that. Bye.